And yes, this is a very auspicious evening. It's a combination night where we're doing the third evening in the Egyptian Energy Science series that began back in January. Been doing these once a month. I'm going to continue once a month right into July. I'll talk a bit more about that later. But tonight is also the final night and graduation night for the people that have been participating in the Vibration as Foundation program, a new program I started back in October. And we did a fall term, and most of the people wanted to keep going, so we did a winter term. So this is the last night of a 20 evening program that has been running. So very auspicious, a little bit sad that it's coming to an end, but nonetheless, all good things. It's also a full moon. Yes. In fact, to begin and to honor the fact that it is a class night as well as a talk night, wanted to begin with some of the practices that these participants have been learning. Matter of fact, just raise your hand if you're one of the participants in the Vibration as Foundation program. So about half the people are. Great. If you have your pendulum, get your pendulum out. If you don't, you've got the roll of pendulums. We'll just have this as an opening practice for the participants of the Vibration as Foundation program. We've been learning to work with a pendulum, not in the usual way that you may be familiar with pendulums, but in the way that it's taught in the biogeometry training, where it's really considered vibrational dowsing rather than mental dowsing. So when you get your pendulum, we just practice in training with the movement of a spiral. So whoever's got a pendulum, you can do clockwise motion. We'll all sync up. And if you don't have a pendulum, you can just internally have a sense of the clockwise motion. And all of us, in honor of the fact that it is the full moon, can also hold in mind this orb that is also spinning with us. Everything's spinning, spiraling, moving, even though it feels like you're sitting still where you are, or actually moving quite quickly in space. And to work with this pendulum is to awaken that sense of a movement through our internal capacities. Let's go counterclockwise now. Feeling the different quality of energy going the opposite direction. And then stopping, going clockwise again. Thinking of our friend the moon accompanying us in space, or spinning, spiraling in space. In fact, holding us in a certain sense, the moon. Let's go counterclockwise again. And then once more clockwise. And so we'll bring that practice to a close, but you can keep just allowing the pendulum to move kind of like a plumb bob. This is a different practice. Plumb bob is what's used by the architects of different temples and even the pyramids, where they would have the plumb bob on a string to show a perfectly vertical line. So just allowing the pendulum to swing in any direction like a plumb bob. And see how it always wants to come to rest at the center with a perfectly vertical line. If I let this thread out even longer, you can see spinning every which way. It always wants to come back to a place of stillness at the center. So if you put that down, what we do in our class is we learn to turn ourselves into a plumb bob. So imagine that you're a plumb bob that is, yeah, you can just put the pendulums to the side. We'll get them later. Just imagine you're swaying like a plumb bob in space, an awakening to that central thread within your central column. This is something that we humans have over the animal kingdom, where we have this verticalness. So awaken to that as you gently sway back and forth, spiral around, and then come to a place of rest, what feels like the center point within you. Just enjoying that enhanced sense of verticalness and centeredness. Next practice in our opening set is describing spirals on your chest, maybe around the sternum area. You can take your open palm, spinning in one direction. You can start clockwise. You can make them larger, make them smaller. You can reverse the direction now, counterclockwise. Feeling how this brings certain harmony, cohesiveness to your own energy field. Again, going clockwise. And once more, counterclockwise. And then giving that practice a rest, feeling the effects of that on your field. And then the last practice for the opening set is working with some of the Egyptian power poses. Egyptian power poses we've been learning, a whole series of them. And so the first one, they're all quite simple. It's just really a pose that you hold. And this first one is the arms parallel to the ground. So those of you in Zoom room can see that I'm just holding my arms out, palms up, and parallel to the ground. The elbows really just around the waist. And experience what it feels like to be engaged in this position. Keeping your awareness on your field. And then we're going to switch to a second Egyptian power pose, which is something of a complement of this first one. So to do that, I'm going to now turn the arms over, the hands over, palms face out, and arms really at a 45-degree angle now. Not straight up, but at a 45-degree angle. As if you were reaching out to open a door. Feel the quality of that energy compared to the first one. And now we'll switch back to the first Egyptian power pose. Again, palms upward, arms parallel to the ground. You may feel the electromagnetic effects of this. This first one, yeah, could be experienced as more of the receptive and magnetic quality. Receiving and amping up your magnetism. And then again, switching to the second one. Complementary, but somewhat opposite. So you may experience this more as a giving, projecting, electric power pose. And then just releasing that practice altogether, being with the after effects of that, asking yourself, how's that, those power poses affected your energy field? Anyone want to comment on that? Mm-hmm. Okay, great, calm. Thank you.
Very electric.
You felt the electric one was coming?
Both had their own sense of that in the room, and I could feel that with everybody.
That the whole room was
Pulsing.
and synced together with these poses. Yes, good observation. Very powerful in that way. Great, thank you. Yeah, there's a lot to these, and yeah, we've enjoyed working with these in the second term of the class. Well, these things will move energy, so if there's energy that wants to move or it's blocked, it'll highlight. Good. Well, moving along here. Yeah, as I said, this is also the third in the series of talks that I've been doing on energy science. And the first one I did back in January called Ancient Egypt Arising in Your Arising. I asked the question, why are we here? You know, what is the purpose of existence? What is evolution leading us towards? And at least for my part, the word was consciousness. The consciousness is really the thing that is wanting to evolve, that's wanting to be addressed. And we can see that today, that we are needing to develop our consciousness, that we need to wake up, we need to become more aware, more conscious of what's going on in us, how we impact the things outside of us, and so forth. And that the pyramids and the different edifices, the different structures that we've seen evolving through time, from the mounds to the menhirs to the obelisks to the pyramids, these vertical structures have really been kind of a complement to our own evolution of consciousness. That these edifices, these structures are really about creating connection, antenna-like connection between the earth and the cosmos. And they represent what we're trying to do internally to create a connection between the earth and the cosmos. And of course, this kind of goes contrary to your mainstream Egyptology that says the pyramids and whatnot are just tombs for kings and queens, of which there is no substantiation. So in the second talk in February, called Ancient Egyptian Heart Architecture, we were looking at, you know, what is the heart behind these edifices, these buildings, and you know, what was the thought in the Egyptians when they were building them? And again, looking at these things as being concentration points for consciousness. And we can even see that the top of a pyramid has this concentrative point, and down at the base, there's this generative part that connects to the earth. And then in the middle of the threefold pyramid, and I've got my threefold pyramid there, some of you have seen before, because we're seeing a pyramid as threefold, the capstone, the base. In the middle is where they ignite the fire. And this is one of the reasons why a pyramid or pyramid is called just that, pyramid, fire in the middle, and that they were being used in a twofold way. That in the summer months, the Nile River, when it was flooded, was being channeled up through the generative side of a pyramid, flooding the pyramid, and they were doing kind of chemical explosions and so what to actually create fire in the middle of the pyramid and turn it into an energy generating machine, much as like it's been described in this book, the Giza power plant, which I'll be looking at more in the next month's talk. And that was being done during the summer months, but then in the winter months, when the Nile River would recede and not be flooding, then the pyramid was used for initiation practices, very high level initiation practices where because there was so much life force created around the pyramid that when an initiate or a neophyte was being initiated in the middle of the pyramid and put into the sarcophagus where they had been creating cosmic fire, then the initiate would be, in a way, ignited with this cosmic fire and connect to the cosmic consciousness. So a really interesting picture that is quite different than what's presented by mainstream Egyptology, which coincidentally, or maybe not so coincidentally, very timely, I would say, that there was a big announcement made this week. Did anybody catch this announcement with the big press conference out in front of the Great Giza Pyramid? Mika, you caught that?
From the chamber in the middle.
Right. Yeah.
They put cameras inside and the tunnel that they just discovered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they had a big tent set up. Matter of fact, I'm going to just share a screen here so that.
That's exciting. Is that TV supposed to be on?
I can put this. Yes, I'm going to put this on here now. Big tent out in front of the Giza Pyramid. And here's the current head of the Supreme Council of Antiquities in Egypt making this announcement. All the news stations there. And of course, there's kind of the poster boy for Egyptian Egyptology, Zahi Hawass. They had a big screen set up for all the people attending this to show this film footage they've got. Can you guys see it okay from there? This is all centered around the north face of the Great Giza Pyramid, right here, where this entrance has this. There's a hole down here we enter. This is where tomb robbers broke in, like about 1,200 years ago. This entrance here, but up here, it was these chevrons that you can't get through, and then there is an entrance down here, a hole that you can go in into a descending passage. But when they used neon photography or meteorography a few years ago, bombarding the pyramid with cosmic rays, they discovered two voids that they didn't know about, two empty spaces within the pyramid. This was actually back in 2017, so it's taken a few years to get around to them actually sending an endoscope in underneath these chevrons, which I was kind of surprised because I heard that they didn't have to do anything invasive because there's actually a hole there big enough to stick your hand through. So why it took 6 years for somebody to come up with the idea of putting an endoscope in to non-invasively take a picture of what's on the inside when you could stick your hand through the hole. yeah, so here's showing where the endoscope went in just beneath these chevrons, these big, massive granite blocks, coming in to this void here. And of course, everybody's all excited and tethered about this to maybe finally find the mummy of King Khufu. But lo and behold, when you got the camera finally in there, this is what it looks like.
Whoa. Almost looks like a larynx.
Yeah.
Like a throat.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, here you have all these scientists standing around. It's like they're still looking for their mummy. You know, where's mummy? They want mummy. So this really, you know, kind of established my prediction that they weren't going to find anything in here, because as I stated back in February's talk, my thesis that I'm working on with the book called "The Key to the Great Living Pyramid of Giza," my thesis is that this highly advanced development of a pyramid is to emulate the anatomy of the human being. You're nodding your head.
That makes sense.
It makes sense, but I've not heard this anywhere from anybody. And so this to me is the oral cavity behind the mouth and the nose of the pyramid on the north side. And the cavity is this vacuum so that there's not really air moving in there, but energy will move into this vacuum and then into the pyramid and up. What's the spine? And then there's the stomach, there's the heart, and all of this. So that the pyramid is, in a way, silently intoning a particular quality of sound. A sacred sound is constantly being intoned, partly because of this cavity that's there.
It's breathing.
But Zahi Hawasi's, there's like, oh, we really feel in the next few months we're going to get in there and we're going to find underneath this stone this is where King Khufu, his mummy, is. We're going to find his treasures there. So keep coming to Egypt, keep tuning in, keep bringing your money here, and so forth. But yes, we will see.
What if there was?
I'm not saying it's not possible that there is, the mummy of the king somewhere hidden in the pyramid, but that would be really the least of the reasons why it was built. It was built so that half the year it was functioning as an energy generator, and then the other half of the year as a place for high-level initiations to take place. But the problem is, people aren't seeing this. This is obvious to you and to others. The people involved in this, the Egyptologists and the archaeologists and engineers and acousticians, they're all specialists that look at it through their own particular lens. And I just realized, recently, as I get downloads around this and I look at it and I go, oh yeah. As a matter of fact, recently I just discovered where the appendix is. That there's an appendix in the Great Giza Pyramid, which was very exciting because Western science really doesn't consider the appendix of any value, that it's a vestigial organ that, you can cut it out, doesn't make any difference. Although it's coming around now scientists and doctors are starting to realize, oh, this thing does have value, it's doing something for humans, along with there's over 500 species of mammals that also have appendixes. Is that just like some useless thing that animals have as well? So to see this in the Great Giza Pyramid is making my thesis even more, giving more strength to it, that the more we understand this pyramid, the more we can understand ourselves. And vice versa, the more we understand ourselves, the more we can understand the pyramid. Yes, please.
So could you please briefly review the heart? Like what you had said about the heart.
In the pyramid? King's chamber is the heart. Queen's chamber is the stomach. And there's this little recessed area with a corbelled ceiling,
I remember the diagram.
and the hole functioning as the appendix in the stomach of the Queen's chamber. So I will come back to looking at this stuff next month as well. But tonight, yeah, got the subject of initiation, or as I'm calling it, ancient Egyptian Ignitiation, because the neophytes were being ignited in the cosmic fire in the pyramid. And but before we go there, tonight's question is, what is of most value to you? Well, if I took it away from you, if you don't even know what it is, it's kind of maybe you don't even have it. What do you value most? What do we want to really protect?
Freedom.
Thank you. Thank you. Freedom. And I'm going to use the word sovereignty. Sovereignty. Thank you, AT. That we have this ability to be self-determined. And this is something that the Egyptians also valued, was their sovereignty. You can see that. They are a civilization that maintains sovereignty for as long as any civilization we know. And this means freedom from oppression, freedom from repression, and even on a personal level, maybe freedom from depression, where we can really stand in our power. We stand in our power so that we have this freedom. And when we have sovereignty, it leads to what? It can lead to longevity. This is why the Egyptians lasted so long. They had this longevity as a civilization. And one of the reasons for that is because they had very strong leadership. Strong leadership in the Egyptian civilization. And the interesting thing about the Egyptian civilization, and well, I should back up a little bit. I was going to say the reason specialists don't really understand what's going on in Egypt, they don't understand the architecture, they're so specialized. But in Egypt, everything was blended. Their political, their civil society was blended with their spiritual society. It was blended with their sciences, and it was blended with their arts as well. It was all blended together. So if people are looking at it through particular lenses, they're not going to really understand what is going on. But because of this blending, they were strong. And it's one of the reasons why we're a weak society in contrast. But to maintain their strong leadership, it was because the priesthood, the Egyptian priesthood, really oversaw what was going on in their society. They determined who was going to be the leaders, and the leaders had to go through initiation. There was, certainly something of a blood lineage that took place within the assigning of leadership. But I've got a quote here from a book called The Great Initiates, where it says, "The pharaohs, it is true, designated their successors among their sons. But sometimes the priests broke the designation of the prince after the pharaoh's death. This was done in the interest of the state. For more than once, they kept the unworthy or weak from the throne in order to give the scepter to a royal initiate." So what this is saying is that the priesthood really had the power to determine who was going to be the leader. And leaders had to go through a process of initiation or ignitiation. So, and this is what ensured strong leadership, strong sovereignty, and therefore longevity. The point of this talk is, what are the aspects that they were employing that we need to employ? So I'm trying to highlight strong leadership, strong sovereignty, longevity. And it took initiation in order to foster that kind of leadership. This thing around initiation, it takes place in stages. There's different levels of initiation. And we see kind of a vestige of that in our own educational system, where you move through grades, get to university, and the first level, the first degree is bachelor. Bachelor. Why do they call it bachelor? It's kind of interesting. I've got my bachelor. Well, think of the word bachelor. It means that you're unmarried. You've not united. You're still not connected fully to whatever subject, whatever field it is that you're studying. So you're not wed to it. The next level, masters, is designating that you've developed some mastery over yourself and over the subject field, that you've made some advance, you've made some maturity with it. And then the highest level, the PhD, which stands for Doctor of Philosophy, Philosophia, the love of wisdom, means that you're married. You're married to the wisdom. You're married to the subject, that you've arrived at the highest point in your development, in your initiation into the subject, where you are wed. You are no longer a bachelor. So in the Egyptian initiation, they had different levels. Some look at 7 different levels, and I'm not going to go into the specifics of those, but it is interesting to see what they had to go through, because they were tested at every level, just the way we're tested in school. You have to pass tests to go to the next level. But what was really important was that certain capacities were activated. Initiation really means activation of capacities. It's not just about more content, more knowledge, more information, which is kind of the way our education is these days. There's the William Yeats, the quote from him about education is not about filling pails, but about lighting fires. And so the idea of initiation in Egyptian time was really not about content, but about igniting fires, cosmic fire within the initiate. And some of the tests were even to the level of having to test the testosterone level of the initiates that were in line to potentially become the next pharaoh, that they had the vital forces to produce offspring for the kingdom. It reminds me of a movie I saw about Egypt a number of years ago, where somebody's out looking over the people of Egypt, and he says, "The men are bursting with seed, and the women are round like fruit." Mm-hmm. That they had very high vital forces within them, that their lifestyle and the way that they lived produced high vital forces. And according to Rudolf Steiner, that's one of the reasons they were able to build these buildings with these huge stones that were tens of thousands of tons, is because they had much stronger vital forces than we have today. Our vital forces have declined. Our testosterone levels have declined. We're in a decline in terms of a civilization, whereas they had very strong vital forces that allowed them to basically move mountains and build mountains.
Jesse?
Yes.
What sources do you access to learn about the Egyptian initiations? Do they have like texts, or like how did you go about learning about these? Like,
right. Okay. Well, a bit of my background. I was gonna touch on that and why I put myself up here to speak with some level of authority around this. I've actually been studying initiation science for over 40 years through my studies of spiritual science, largely through the work of Rudolf Steiner, but others. So I've read many different texts, many different sources on initiation science, you know, in its kind of generic archetypal form. And then specifically with the Egyptians, I've also studied biogeometry with Dr. Ibrahim Karim and Dr. Robert Gilbert. I've studied, I'm a trained spiritual psychotherapist.
I guess my question though is, what is the actual source? Like, was there a tablet, or like, was there actual tablet or something that the Egyptians wrote about these initiations?
Well, that's the tricky part, because a lot of this is just passed on orally. And I'm coming to that. I'm going to come to that in kind of an oblique way, because it's a good question. It's an interesting question. You're asking, how do you know? And how to know that you know.
I'm just curious if the Egyptians actually wrote something down, and that could be deciphered.
Well, you know, when you start to read books like the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which is another misnomer. It's not the Book of the Dead. It's really called the Book of Coming into the Light of Day. So it's another thing where Egyptology is really distorting the picture of what's going on in the ancient Egyptian culture, calling it a cult of the dead, but really it was a cult of initiation. They were very much focused on initiation. And this took place in the plateau of Giza. Giza was like this multiplex place where there was a lot of different stuff that was going on there, including these high-level initiations. It was a mystery school center. And when I say mystery school center, it's important to get clear on what the word mystery means. I'm sure you know what the word mystery means in the etymological root in Greek, mysterium. Mysterium means closed off or held in. That the mystery center, when we talk about a sacred mystery, we're not talking about something that can't be understood, like I can't understand where that button went to. We're talking about sacred mysteries that the understanding is closed off until you enter into it. You have to enter into it. So you had to enter into a mystery school and do a training, go through degrees of initiation to develop your capacities so that you would be able to understand the mysteries. And in fact, we can divide the mysteries into what's known as lesser mysteries and greater mysteries, referred to as the lesser mysteries and the greater mysteries. What are the lesser mysteries? The lesser mysteries are kind of like what we do in the Vibration as Foundation course or the Spiritual Boot Camp, where we study things, we work with geometry, we do drawing of things. Matter of fact, I want to do that right now, just as a little example. Everybody grab a piece of paper, if you want, piece of paper and something to draw on top of, like one of the folders. There's pencil crayons. Just to give you an example of what engaging with the lesser mysteries is about, because it certainly isn't just about intellectual stuff. There's a need to engage the will and to do things. Because in this Giza Plateau area, this mystery school center, half of the year would be flooded. The Nile, which is about 9 kilometers or so from the Giza Plateau now, was much closer at that time and would flood the area, and they would flood the interior of the pyramid. But then the other half of the year, it would become this mystery school center where initiations took place. So I just want you to, while you're listening, to draw an ankh. Ankh is a hieroglyph, a sacred symbol that, as part of the lesser mysteries, they would contemplate. So I'll hold mine up in front of the camera. We don't even have to give it a name. It's really a sense of quality that would be imprinted upon the candidates in the mystery school, meditating upon these things and letting it work upon them. Why? Why bother putting your will into drawing things, contemplating them, imprinting with it? Well, think of it. If I asked you to bring up a memory, which is an imprint of something that makes you sad, like maybe you had a falling out with somebody and you started to think about it right now, and you brought up that memory imprint, that would change your energy. That would change your demeanor. You would feel sad. Now, let's switch it up and think of a good time you had. Sometime when you're with somebody and it was just really blissful, it was really pleasurable, it was really fun. You're accessing the resource state of that imprint, that memory, and that's changing your energy field in a different way. So by working with these archetypal images and imprinting them on your energy field, they become resource states that build you and structure your energy in ways that will align you and harmonize you with the cosmic intelligence, if you will, from which these symbols and archetypes come from. So a neophyte is like one who's a Nubian, neo means new, would be engaging with the lesser mysteries. They would study and memorize the sacred scriptures. They'd perhaps learn herbology. They'd learn astronomy. They'd learn how to take care of their body with particular diet, fasting, purification. A lot of the lesser mysteries was about purification and preparation for the greater mysteries, which we'll get to in a moment. But they actually also engage with Egyptian yoga. There is a form of Egyptian yoga. There's something now that you can train with called Kemetic yoga that also works with the chakras, works with Kundalini, works with the koshas or the different bodies and so forth. And with these sorts of practices, it's about accelerating your development by really crystallizing certain things within your energy bodies. And as with, even the Vedic yoga, you've probably seen in Egyptian imagery, this image of the serpent coming out of the brow, the uraeus, the cobra coming out of the brow, indicating that the neophyte has raised the kundalini up the central column, piercing and opening all the chakras along the way, and then opening the third eye. And typically you would see that imagery with someone who was a pharaoh, someone who has achieved that level of initiation where they have opened their third eye, they've opened their highest psychic powers. And I think it's interesting, the imagery of an animal in this awakening, because part of what engagement in the lesser mysteries was about was the purification and refinement of the lower instincts and impulses. that we have as humans, because humans are transitory beings, right? We have these animal skins, got animal instincts. We function a lot like animals do. But then there's this other element that we have that's there, the consciousness, to connect us to cosmic consciousness. So part of the work in the Lesser Mysteries was to overcome some of the lower impulses, to refine them. So it's interesting, the image of an animal, the cobra, in service to the human, to awaken to its higher nature, beyond the animal nature. It's also interesting to note that the Egyptian gods, many of them are depicted with animal heads. Again, showing that the realm of animals is something that we're moving through, we're transitioning through that nature, and they, in a way, are serving us in our arising to a higher nature. And the gods are depicting that as well, and having, like Anubis with the jackal head, and Horus with the raven head, and Thoth with the crane head, and so forth. That there's this work between the animal nature and the human nature, is what I'm trying to say. Now, getting deeper into the initiation itself, this Giza Plateau multiplex, there's all sorts of tombs and caverns and mazeways there. And of course, conventional Egyptologists will say, well, they're just tombs for the dead, and the corpse is gone because grave robbers came and took it away and all this. No. It was an initiation center, not just a cult to the dead. It was an initiation center, and all these so-called tombs were really meditation chambers and initiation chambers. And some of them had sarcophagus in them, which were used for initiations. Furthermore, there's all sorts of laneways or mazeways underneath the Giza Plateau, which were used in service for initiation. So, for example, when a person got to a certain stage, they were tested. They were put into the maze underground in the subterranean area of the plateau, and had to find their way out of the maze. How? Well, it was a test of their ability to connect inwardly and spiritually, to find the guidance in these mazeways underground or not. And there was every possibility they would fail in these initiatory tests. And, we've all seen movies where, explorers are going in these mazeways and they come to some chamber and they find a skeleton, right? And there's some poor sod who just didn't succeed in his initiation, got lost, and died in this underground cavern. And that could take place because it's really a life and death, lost and found game, in a way that they would enter into in initiation. And in a way, it was a three-way test, a test of their threefoldness, because as I pointed out in my examination of the pyramid last month, the pyramid's threefold. It has a head or a brain, a thinking capacity. It has its base, which is really the will capacity. And then in the middle is the heart zone with the heart capacities. So initiates would be tested in threefoldness when put in these mazeways. Do they have clarity of thinking to follow the thread to get back? Do they have the courage of will and the perseverance and so forth to push through in their test? And do they have the fierceness of heart to face the unknown, as well as heart intelligence that would act as a moral compass? Because they're constantly being tested, not just in the mazeways, but their morality was being tested, their intelligence was being tested, their will was being tested. This threefoldness was being tested. And one of the reasons I know this, to get back to AT's question, is because I also have training as a Waldorf school teacher, which is a form of education that really is a form of initiation. It's an educational system that sees that children need to be initiated and activated in a certain way in a threefoldness. That's why one of the mottos of Waldorf education is education of the head, heart, and hands. There has to be this threefoldness, so there's going to be balance. And if there isn't going to be balance in the initiate, there's going to be imbalance, and that leads to, on one extreme, insanity or mental illness, and on the other extreme, even death, where they would lose their way in their initiations and not make it back. So if they did succeed in these initiations in the lesser mysteries, they would be known as an adept. They were adept to a certain level, which is interesting because the tour I'm going to be taking next fall, because I'm going to Egypt next fall to work on the book, take a little bit of a research and writing sabbatical next fall to go on a tour with a tour company which is called Adept Expeditions, which is pretty cool. It's got a bit of an esoteric side to it. And by the way, tonight is part of the fundraising. This 2-week tour is going to cost $10,000. Cha-ching. A lot of money to spend in 2 weeks. So a little basket over there for people who feel so inclined to contribute to the research that I'm doing and help out with this research writing sabbatical I'm going to take next fall with Adept Expeditions, plus stay there for October and November to finish the writing of the book. So once these adepts got to a certain level of initiation within the lesser mysteries, then it was time for the greater mysteries. All right, this is the big stuff. This is where it gets quite interesting and involved actually taking place inside of the Great Giza Pyramid, where they had these initiation chambers in the center. And here the initiate would undergo what's known as the temple sleep. They would be put into one of the sarcophagus in the Great Giza Pyramid, potentially given some sort of concoction with the blue lotus flower or other herbs, things like that, that would put them into a trance state in the sarcophagus for 3 days and 3 nights. For what? Well, basically, they underwent voluntarily an induced near-death experience, NDE for short, or OBE, out-of-body experience. This is called part of the greater mysteries because this is where they would have direct contact with the spiritual world, not through symbols, hieroglyphs, texts, and encounters in the physical world. They would have direct contact because they were prepared for it. And it was, something they definitely had to prepare for. And then during these 3 days and 3 nights, when they're kind of held in this limbo state, this near-death experience. Anybody had a near-death experience here? Yeah? Oh, okay. Quite a few here. All right. So interesting. Might be interesting later to hear more of the specifics. But basically, it was like lucid dreaming. Who here has experienced lucid dreaming? Okay, that's cool too. I get lucid dreams where you're dreaming, but you know you're dreaming. And you're awake in the dream, and you have a certain level of will to engage with the dream itself. So when I have lucid dreams, it's like, oh wow, okay, I'm having a lucid dream. I can like start to explore, and I move around, and I encounter beings and interaction, and I can decide, I can make choices about where I'm going to go. You could call it the astral plane. We call it dreaming, but at night we're actually out of our body and moving on the astral plane and interfacing with the spiritual world. So this initiate engaging with this kind of lucid dream state, we're being tested again to how well they can navigate the mazeways of the astral world. And the lesser mysteries, they were engaging the mazeways in the subterranean levels of the Giza Plateau. But when they got into the greater mysteries, they had to navigate the mazeways of the astral plane. So God helped them that they were prepared and they were successful in the lesser mysteries, so that when they were put into this state, they didn't get lost. And they didn't succumb in their moral navigation of things to the seductions and the temptations and the illusions that they have to face in the astral world. Because that's really what is, part of the astral world. It's a realm of everything. And so what do they have to help them navigate? Okay, this is an important piece here. They had to connect to what's known as the midnight sun. The midnight sun is an esoteric term referring to the inner essence of light. We have the physical sun, right? What is that? It gives us light physically. It guides us by day in finding our way. In this initiation practice where they're in this lucid dream state, they'd have to connect to the inner aspect of the sun and be guided by the inner light. And I'll put up another bit of share screen here. So you can see some depictions of this. Here is a really interesting piece of Egyptian art showing this is Horus, and he's in this boat on top of this, really the threshold. He's having to navigate across the threshold. The boat represents really the soul body, the Ba, as it's referred to. But above his head is his connection to the midnight sun. And of course, here's the eternal version of the sun. But here it's showing that above the head, there's this connection to the sun. Here is showing a variety of different people, of pharaoh and initiates, with all their own version of this connection to something above. That we have to grow this connection to the midnight sun, the inner light, to guide us. And in my research and in my practice, this is quite a literal thing. I work with 5 chakras above the head. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the 5th one above the head could really be called that midnight sun, the inner essence of light. The inner essence of the physical sun is what we need to connect with to navigate the mazeways of the inner world. Again, initiate in the boat, crossing over to the other side. Now, in Egyptology, they'll say this is just about somebody who's died and is going into the afterlife, but they don't recognize really the nature of initiation science, that these depictions are about initiations that are taking place. Here's a priestess with the midnight sun above the head. It's a statue.
Whoa, those eyes.
I know.
Better to see you.
This is Isis with her son Horus, which in a way can be considered a precursor to the Madonna and Child in the Egyptian iconography of things, with this connection to the inner essence of the sun, the midnight sun. And yeah, these are ubiquitous throughout. Now here, this last one, this relief on stone, is kind of curious. Why do they have heads shaped this way, these extended heads? These sorts of images are not necessarily depicting the physical body, but actually the etheric body of the human, which is referred to as the ka. The ka is the etheric or the energetic body. The ba is the soul. And our etheric body, our etheric head, extends beyond our physical head. And that's partly to give us connection to these chakras above the head and to the realms beyond the physical. The Egyptians were much more configured that way in their development. At this point in our evolution, we're much more impacted in the physical body. Our energy is very much contracted and impacted in the physical body, which is no surprise that our current science thinks that all we are is a brain. You know, the head is what thinks. But the Egyptians would not have thought that way. They knew that through their ka and their ba, it extended beyond their physical body, and it's through that kind of engagement they can engage with other dimensions. And this is why I've been pounding this idea in my talks the last couple of years, that we don't think with our brains. The brain is not what we think with. The brain is an interface, a physical interface that mediates between other layers of our being, our ka, our ba, to interface with other dimensions, including allowing ourselves to connect to the midnight sun. This temple sleep was really the height of initiation, where the initiate 3 days and 3 nights in this lucid dream type state had to navigate the mazeways of the astral planes. And there's an interesting quote that goes along with the goddess Isis. And there's a statue in Egypt with Isis, and it has the words written on it: "I am all that has been and is and shall be, and no mortal has ever lifted my veil. No mortal has ever lifted my veil." And what that is implying is that in order to lift the veil, and we're talking about the veil of illusion, the veil of matter, the veil of materia, which is, materia mother, the mother matter matrix. In order to see beyond the mother matrix of things, to lift the veil, Isis says no mortal has ever done that. No mortal can do that. Well, how can it be done then? Back to Cameron's comment, It's only with our immortal part that we can lift the veil. And that's what the initiation was about, was the initiate had to connect with his immortal, eternal spirit self in order to go beyond this world to see into the other world, connect to the midnight sun. It's only when we connect to our spirit self, nature, that we're going to penetrate beyond this world, because this world is occupied by our mortal self. Right? This part is mortal. It's going to go back to dust someday. And our ka is going to disintegrate someday. And even our ba is going to disintegrate when we die. But the eternal self that goes from lifetime to lifetime, and the Egyptians believed in reincarnation. And this is why, there was so much emphasis on this threshold between this world and the other world, is because they believed that this threshold was crossed back and forth from lifetime to lifetime. And to be initiated, you could do this more with consciousness. So, in essence, what the initiate went through was a form of death, a death to their mortal self, so they could connect with their immortal self. As it was put in one of the books on, I read on Egyptian initiation, it said, death is life, and life is death. Birth is death, and death is birth. To be born on earth is to die to the spiritual world. To die on earth is to be born into the spiritual world, to higher consciousness. The womb is the grave, and the grave is the womb. So in a way, we see things only from one perspective here. We think, a grave is a grave. And Egyptologists look at these chambers and they say, they're just tombs where they stick dead people. No, these were wombs where people would be initiated and they would die to this world so they could be born again into their higher capacity, their higher nature. And part of this process required this separation out of the bodies. And we're looking really at a model where there's a physical body and a life force body or etheric body, and then the astral body, which is, the star body, astral star. It's the part that connects us more to the planets, whereas the etheric body connects us more to this planet. And then the fourth body is the spirit self. So there had to be this separation out. That's what was happening in the initiation, the separating out. And the reason it could be done safely, because it can be done unsafely and can lead to disastrous results. And people taking alcohol or taking drugs or different things that create this separation of their bodies, and then they can't get back into their bodies. The reason it could be done is because of the structural integrity of the pyramid itself. That this Great Giza Pyramid had its own physical body, had its own etheric body that was generated by the Nile River. It had its own astral body, which was generated by its alignment with the stars and the planets. And the pyramid had its own consciousness. When it was functioning, it really was a house of cosmic consciousness. It was a habitation where consciousness could exist. And when the initiate was put into the sarcophagus and his bodies were separated, he was then able to connect to the highest consciousness possible. It's because of the structural integrity of this building. Just a word on what was happening with the hierophants and the temple workers. What were they doing? Because it was being guided by a hierophant, the head person over the initiation, and the temple workers, they'd be chanting. they'd be working with the frequencies of the building through their songs, through their incantations. That's really what this Book of the Dead is. It's not a book per se. It's actually a collection of incantations and spells that were written by a variety of different Egyptian priests over a period of about 1,000 years, and have been collected into this, called the Book of the Dead. But it's really, as the Egyptians called it, the book of coming into the light of day, because it was about connecting to the midnight sun. And Egyptology has just twisted this around and really is subverting the message of what was going on and disempowering all of us, because we don't see the potential. As who was talking about potential? Yes, was it Nika? You were talking about potential that is felt.
Why do they call it midnight sun?
It's the midnight sun because it's the light you can see in the dark. And midnight, in our terms is the darkness of night. But or sometimes it's called the sun at the midnight hour. It's talking about connecting to the inner essence. See, because they thought that when the sun went down at night, right? Like, ooh, where'd the sun go? It goes down beneath the western horizon. They thought it was going into the underworld and then emerged in the east in the morning. So midday, lots of light shining on the pyramid, and then at night it's in the underworld, so they could still connect to the light even though it's in the underworld. So they call it the midnight sun. But you couldn't connect it with your physical eyes, you had to connect with it with your third eye. They believed that the sun was alive, right? They call it Ra. And so they weren't just a bunch of sun worshipers like, hey, we got lots of sun here, let's go to the beach, worship the sun. No, they named the sun Ra and worshipped it as a living being, but you didn't connect with it physically, you had to connect with it inwardly. And that's what the initiation processes were doing, separating them out from their physical senses, so with their highest immortal part could connect with the immortal, eternal aspect of the sun, Ra, that would guide them in the mazeways of the astral planes, or not. They could come back and be completely mad. But if they succeeded, they were imprinted, right? This thing about imprinting. Something is imprinted upon their lower bodies, so when they came back, they were actually a different person. They were a different personality. And it's very interesting, chapter 3 of How to Know Higher Worlds, by Rudolf Steiner, and this is a book we study in the spiritual boot camp. He talks about the trials of initiation, and he refers to the draft of forgetting and the draft of remembering. That when you go through initiation, symbolically, or maybe even literally, you drink something that's called the draft of forgetting. What do you forget? You forget yourself. You forget your lower personage. So I would forget for a time, I'm Jesse Stewart, born in Toronto, Canadian, this, that, and the other thing. Like, that's all temporal. That's not immortal. So the draft of forgetting gets you to forget your lower memories. Your lower memories aren't bouncing around like, oh yeah, I remember this thing and that thing about my life as Jesse Stewart. That needs to get out of the way so that you can then imbibe the draft of remembering. What do you remember? The greater self, the transcendent self, can then be brought in. The immortal self can be remembered. And then when the initiate came back into their body after 3 days and 3 nights, they'd be identifying with this immortal aspect of themselves. They'd be identifying with the experience they'd have. They'd be married to the philosophia. They'd be totally in love and married, like a PhD, to the highest level of wisdom, which meant that they could be a leader in society. They'd be a very capable leader of society to guide society and ensure the sovereignty and longevity of society. This is what's missing in our society, and why we need to understand what self-initiation is about, which I'm coming up to here as I start to wind this down. There's an interesting quote from a 4th century mystic, Gregory of Nyssa. He says, "We remember what is to come." He's speaking of initiation, is allowing us to remember what is to come. If you undergo initiation, you can then perhaps become a prophet to the people. These people would sometimes become prophets, because when you go to the midnight hour, the midnight sun, and this happens when we all die, by the way. Initiation is just consciously doing what we're all going to do when we die, as we go on this journey into the underworld or the afterlife or whatever you want to call it. And we leave our physical body, our etheric body, our astral body, and then we come to this place where we're just purely in our immortal nature, the highest point called the midnight hour, the midnight sun, and we can see our past and we can see our future, our personal plus our collective. And so people that do this as an initiation, they come back as prophets because they have a vision of the past, they have a vision of the future, and they can be a prophet to the people and serve in that way. Now, just as there was temptations in the lesser mysteries, right? You have to purify and overcome temptations and seductions. There's also temptations in this high initiation, the greater mystery, higher initiation, when you're in this out-of-body experience. What would be the temptation? Thank you. To not come back into your body. Because in the astral plane, there can be much beauty and allurement and pleasure and so forth. Matter of fact,
Just being tapped into all that knowledge. You'd just be like a student in an endless library.
I was going to read, this is a book I just picked up because it's interesting. Have an out-of-body experience in 30 days. Not even that thick to read, you know? Have an out-of-body experience in 30 days. Okay, let's see what it says here. You get progress to an actual out-of-body experience, or OBE, and gradually lead you into more and more advanced variations, from flying to distant realms and going back in time to communicating with loved ones far away, and to the exquisite pleasures of out-of-body sex by the end of 30 days.
Well, that's really tempting.
Anyone want to bore us?
Is on the 29th day you drink cyanide?
I don't recommend it. I do recommend books like this, which we study in the Spiritual Boot Camp, or Awakening the Third Eye from Samuel Sagan.
It doesn't take 30 days.
Studied with him for a number of years. Power of Focusing, Jewel in the Lotus. Oh, Secrets of the Yellow Brick Road, a map for the modern spiritual journey, written by Jesse Stewart. Oh my gosh. Even have my own book on modern initiation practices that I would put on top of out-of-body experiences in 30 days. The free flight program. Well, that word free, they're really trying to hit you with free.
Yeah, but have you tried that program?
I did, and I never came, part of me never came back. So yeah, the temptation can be to not want to come back into your body. And you know what? There's a lot of people on the planet that are not in their body. There's lots of people walking around this neighborhood here with CAMH that are not in their body. For whatever reason, through some sort of experience, perhaps drug-induced, they got caught. Some part of them made a choice to stay out of their body. And there's nothing we can do that's going to make them come into their body. So these initiates, yeah, they came back, and it was like they were born again. They were like a different person. They didn't go through a mystical miscarriage. That's the other way, a mystical miscarriage when it fails. But when it succeeds, they're what's known as born again into their higher nature, and they can function from there. And they fulfilled this koan of Isis, where she says, "No mortal has lifted my veil." Well, the initiate has engaged his immortal nature and pulled back the veil of illusion, and is known as a son of Isis as a result. Something else to mention, and this is also nicely described in Steiner's book, How to Know Higher Worlds. He talks about the lower and greater guardians of the threshold, because there's a crossing of a threshold between this world and the higher world, and there's guardians. There's the lower guardian and the greater guardian, or the higher guardian. They're really both parts of ourselves. The lower guardian that you have to meet when you approach the threshold is a part of you that holds all your thoughts, feelings, and actions from the past. It kind of carries your karmic baggage, you could say. So this is why there was so much purification and moral development that had to take place as preparation, is because one of the first things you're going to meet at the threshold is your unconscious shadow side. So that has to be dealt with. We have to deal with it, while we're here. And then when we come to these threshold experiences, they're not quite as dramatic as they may be, as mine was. I had quite a threshold experience when I went to Peru and drank what I did 10 rounds of ayahuasca, rather strong ayahuasca, over 2 weeks. Don't recommend it, but I really encountered this lower guardian of the threshold, these things from my past that were unconscious, that were brought to the conscious, and I had to look at them, I had to face them, I had to overcome my fear and all of that. I had to have my threefold aspects: clarity of thinking, courage of will, and morality of the heart, functioning to go through those sorts of initiations and encounters with the lower guardian. Then the greater guardian is also part of us. It's really that part that holds our potential for the future. It says, you can become this, you can do this, you have this possibility in your destiny to do this if you do the work in refining the lower guardian. It's when we refine the lower guardian that actually becomes the vehicle to step up and connect with the greater guardian of the threshold. Just wanted to touch on this thing about mummification, because that's a whole other thing that Egyptology kind of messes up, calling Egyptians just a cult of the dead, right? It's all about the cult of the dead. But the mummification originally and primarily was for the preservation of the physical body of those who had been initiated, those that had really advanced higher up in society, that they had actually brought some of their immortal nature into their mortal body, their physical body. And so normally when a person dies, all that dissipates and the person moves on. But the mummification process brings about what? Something about preservation. And I'll use the word longevity again. It ensured longevity of these bodies of the initiate or the pharaoh, that what they had accomplished through their initiation was preserved and became an anchorage on the earth that again would serve society even though they're dead. They would be able to serve society while they're in their body and alive, but by preserving the body through mummification, it became an anchorage of their accomplishments in the earth that in a way was kind of a human-made power spot. And there's lots of power spots naturally occurring all over the earth. And the Giza Plateau was definitely a major power spot and is a major power spot on the earth. But when they were mummifying these initiates and putting them in tombs, because the plateau is also a necropolis, it is a place where people were buried, it amplified the natural power spot with these human-made power spots, which increased the power even more and increased the longevity of their civilization. They really knew what they were doing spiritually. It's so impressive. It's so amazing. And it's so sad how far we've gotten away from this wisdom, because they believed in life after death. And it's only up till about 400 years ago that people stopped believing in that, when the rational mind kicked in and science and all of this saying, well, we can't prove it, so we don't really know if there's life after death. But how many people here raised their hand, said, I've had a near-death experience? You've left your body. Yes, you've been on the other side. You know personally that there's something beyond this world, even though you can't take an endoscope and stick it through and go, oh yeah, you can see there's something on the other side. So the mummification was an important part of their culture to anchor these accomplishments in. And in a way, the mummies were like battery packs of higher energies and higher frequencies. Do we need to return to mummification? Do we need to return to building pyramids? Do we need to return to engaging with psychedelic substances that catapult us out of our bodies and puts us into a trance-like state? Well, my answer is maybe. You can decide if that's the path for you. But another thing I'll point out is this book called Old and New Mysteries. And this is another important distinction to make, that there's the old mysteries and the new mysteries. And what we've been talking about tonight is really the old mysteries, the old ways that were appropriate for them and their state of consciousness and their state of evolution, and how they were more out of their bodies naturally and more clairvoyant naturally and things like that. We've evolved. We have different bodies and we have a different state of consciousness. So it's not necessarily appropriate for us to engage in the old mysteries and the old ways the way that they did. And in fact, we don't need necessarily to go to Giza and go into the Great Giza Pyramid, the one remaining number one wonder of the world, because we now are the number one wonder of the world. We have the same anatomy as the Great Giza Pyramid. That's the thesis of my book, is that it was mirroring our potential and our anatomy. But now we have to take up responsibility even more to initiate ourselves in the pyramid of ourselves. We don't have to go somewhere else. We can do it right here, right now. And in doing that, I pointed to a number of different books that are all really about, even Steiner's book's called A Modern Path of Initiation. Mine's called A Map for the Modern Spiritual Journey. But what I do here, what I run here, particularly with the Spiritual Boot Camp and the Vibrationist Foundation course, you can call that a modern mystery center. I am engaging people in the lesser mysteries in a modern way, because, in a word, what we need is modern education. The word education means to lead out. We need to educate or lead ourselves out in a way that's appropriate to this day and time, where we can have self-initiation, self-ignitiation. And we've been doing that here with the Vibrationist Foundation course. What I need to do is bring it around to the presentation to the graduates of a present, the presentation of a present, and kind of a thank you to each of the participants that has been in the class, because it's really furthered my education and furthered my research and furthered my love in life. So yeah, this is the awards part of the program, where what people are going to get, because this is so great. At the beginning, I told people, take notes, read your notes, learn from your own notes, learn from your own inner teacher. And Sarah, she did a stellar job in creating a book of her notes and with diagrams, and wrote it all up and put in additional research and whatnot. So I thought, for those of you that didn't take notes, you can have Sarah's notes and read them, which are excellent.
Duly noted.
I've been reading them. Yeah, the front cover, Vibration as Foundation, Masters in Resonance. So yeah, just to round things out, what's ahead is yeah, going to be some more talks next month. April, we'll be looking at the Great Giza Pyramid again, but from the perspective of Christopher Dunn, the Giza power plant. But I'm going to recontextualize his research within my research, where it's not just a mechanical plant, which is what kind of his thesis, you know, that was functioning in a machine-like way, but rather it brought it to level of virtually being a living organism. Kind of like Frankenstein, right? Dr. Frankenstein was trying to create a living being out of something that was lifeless. So really excited to get into that. That's April. And then in May, going to be looking at electrified Egyptians, how the Egyptians actually had a relationship to electricity. This is based on the work of James Ernst Brown, who I did research into his stuff about 6 years ago and even interviewed James Ernst Brown. And fascinating how they were working with electricity in their architecture and their bodies and their rituals and so forth. And then in June, I'm going to be looking at the work of Robert Bauval, restoring the spiritual soul of Egypt, the soul of ancient Egypt. And he's got some interesting stuff pertaining to the astrological, astronomical aspects of the Great Giza Pyramid. Also, I'm going to be looking at the work of Dr. Ibrahim Karim, who started biogeometry. This is his new book, Hidden Reality. So that's coming in June. And then the last one in July, going to actually do it out in the park. It's kind of a park party in combination with a concert by the band that I'm in, Shine. So we're going to be playing out there on a Saturday evening, and then we got amps and a mic, so I'll do a little talk. I'm calling it the Summary. How you like that? Last but not least, I'll mention the basket again for anybody who wants to support the research that I'm doing and this research sabbatical to Egypt next fall. That's all very much appreciated. To close, want to do one more practice again, and that is another Egyptian power pose. I think it's one of your favorites. You were mentioning it the other day. I'm going to do the blessing pose, which you find in a lot of different cultures, with the one hand out horizontally and the other hand out is up vertically. So for you people there on Zoom, you can see two hands like this. One's vertical, one's horizontal. This is the pose of blessing. And while you're going to do that, I'm going to strike the golden bowl and repeat the mantra that we've been doing each class. For the sake of the circle, the glory of the golden ring, oneness in mind, actions aligned.